Yes.
I'm John Travis in Novato, California on the 6th of August, 2020, talking to Mark Schmid Neuhaus in Munich. Actually, he's in a beautiful little town just outside Salzburg, but he's known for Munich, and visiting him there and taking a walk in the countryside, it is a beautiful spot. So, Mark, I want to find out, beginning with your birth and parents and siblings and early childhood experiences, what led you to becoming a doctor and then becoming a non-conventional doctor? So let's start way back when.
Way back when? Well, I'm born in 1940. This was just the beginning of the World War.
Yes.
And now my dog is entering. I think he's going out. So
well, your dog is welcome.
He will not sitting around here very quiet, and he will contribute. So my wife just asked him to go back with her.
Okay.
That's living in the country. Kirchenschöring, it's something like about 20 kilometers from the north, from Salzburg, but in German southeast Bavaria. And I'm living there since 2004, 2005, and working partly in Munich, working partly here. Now, since I'm 80 years, I love much more to live in the countryside. Well, back to 1940, I was born in Berlin. At the time where the Second World War was already running. And so we left Berlin and went to a small Bavarian village, Lengries, where I passed my childhood until my 10th year. My childhood, if I think what was really important, I think being a child of the war with all the ingredients which do not fit in any childhood.
Yeah.
Ingredients. My father was a soldier who fell in Russia when I was 2 years and 9 months. At that time, my mother was pregnant with my younger brother. And can you imagine how that is if the door opens and some soldiers come with an official mission to tell the wife, oh, your man has died as a hero. And then 45, I remember that we have been in the fights. Before us, the Americans, behind us, the SS. And then a grenade hit our house, and my very much beloved grandmother, well, she was hit by that grenade. And I think these are things which define somehow where you start.
Yeah.
Pass mal auf, ich bin hier mitten in einem Interview.
I don't know what that meant, but I got the idea.
Excuse me for the interruptions.
Clear up.
So when you ask me about my childhood, on the other side, that was living in a rural area, which means living in a very free environment, not regulated, educated by horses, by cows, by dogs. And nevertheless, the first 10 years have been very, very much marked by the Second World War.
Yeah. losing your father.
Which meant for me that what you look at as a normal childhood, I think that didn't happen to me.
Oh, for sure.
When I was 5 years old, I really felt I was the boss of the family. A widow with 2 children and uncertain perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
You get very fit in all issues of survival.
Yeah.
But being fit in issues of survival is not exactly what a child needs.
Sure, yeah.
So something which I think was important in my life, and looking back, if someone would ask me what kind of personal trait characterizes you, my answer would be very simple. I'm a very resilient type. Resilience got one of the main qualities. I can talk now about resilience because this became an important theme. In the beginning, I didn't know what resilience meant, but I knew how survival functions.
Yeah. Now, was there much impact of the war around where you were living before the grenade, or were you?
Well, there was impact because that small little village in the Isar Winkel, something like 60 kilometers south from Munich in the beginning of the Alps, that was a military place. There was a military base. So what we were familiar with was the soldiers going to fight and coming back. And so my very early memories are full of soldiers. Knowing my father has been a soldier, and then, well, there was a small kind of, no, I'm remembering only the French word cimetière, which is a place where people are buried.
Cemetery.
A cemetery,
Yeah.
okay. My father, that was a wooden cross with a name for all the heroes of the war. And in the evening, when I was 5 years, 6 years, I went to water the flowers. But there, my father, the memory of the father was that wooden cross for the heroes of the war. And well, I wanted always to know what all these things which I perceived, what is the reality behind. So one of the main themes in the beginning was, I want to know, I want to understand. And that was the red lines, I think, through my whole life until now, that I am something like a wise old man.
You certainly are. Now, you didn't actually get to know your father then if you were so young and he was away at the war.
I have a very, very small memory because he was always in the fights, and the few times he was on leave to see his family. I have not a very concrete memory. What I memorize is the narratives which I heard from my mother. And I think these narratives were somehow ambivalent because she was talking about a dead hero. And I think that she also wanted to understand this catastrophe, where we thought not that we had lost the war. This is too simple. It was always more complex how to understand a world where such horrible things like a world war happen.
Yeah.
There was this question. So her narratives have been not simple narratives about heroes. And I think she was aware that this war was a catastrophe for everybody who was involved. And there was the end of that narrative. Do all things that such things never happen. Oh, this goes deep.
Yeah.
I am astonished that if I talk about this, the emotions come up.
I'm not astonished at all. I can't imagine what it must feel like.
I wanted to, yes, to go back authentically, but now I am somehow overwhelmed.
Well, you're showing your true self and the empathy and that is you've expressed in your whole life and your work, and it comes. Our gifts come from our wounds, and your wounding was catastrophic. So, and it's led to a wonderful gift that, thank heavens, you've been able to give that to the world and make up for some of the horrors of that era. So thank you, Mark. I'm very touched. I'm feeling teary too.
My line, I wanted to prepare or to somehow to do things that such things like that war is not repeated.
Yeah.
I don't think that I had the idea of I have to choose medicine to become a doctor. No, I think my decision for medicine was much more rational. You can imagine that I belong to what the German sociologist Schelsky called the skeptical generation.
Skeptical?
Skeptical.
Oh, skeptical, yeah.
Skeptical
sure.
generation.
Yeah.
Which means if you have gone through this perception of a destructive world, but you nevertheless are resilient, you don't give up. So you look at the world, you want to understand, and you see, well, what I remember from 5 to 10 in Greece, the German military base became an American military base. And we got invited by the Americans. We got somehow support. And the first orange I ate was at a Christmas event which the Americans organized for the children of Languese. And well, later on, I was aware of how the Marshall Plan enabled Germany to restruct itself. And if I look to what we have been able to develop in the years from 45 to let me say about 2000, well, what a change.
Yeah.
And I understood that one of the main things we have to realize is some kind of solidarity of humans with one another. And so.
Now, were there any uncles or family or any other extended family around you?
Aunt. But many of the members of my family just died in the war. So there was not a big family. There was a small family, the leftovers, the survivors.
And your grandmother was with you through your childhood?
My grandmother was dead through that grenade which hit the house.
And that you were, what, about 5 years old then?
Yes.
Was she an important figure in your life?
She was a very important person in my life. And
you had a younger brother?
To understand why I lost her. Well, if I'm talking about this, remembering the feelings, not in an intellectual way. Well, I feel the loss.
Yeah.
And
a lot of loss.
In some aspect, I think we want to look to what happened in my life, and somehow I am astonished how I get into these early emotions.
I'm not at all. It's so normal, and yet the American stereotype of Germans being unemotional, you're blowing that stereotype.
Well, Jack, this is one thing I tried really to keep, to be as well emotional as using my intellectual capacity and power. And I think I always wanted to have it balanced. And in some aspect, as I notice in this moment myself, I kept my emotionality.
Yes, yes, thank heavens.
And I think this was very important, being a brilliant student in medicine, not being blown away by intellectual brilliance, but keeping a clear mind and being aware that dealing with science, there is one part which you have to have in mind, or where you have to have a clear view that our knowledge is limited, and that we are always dealing with uncertainty.
Mhm.
And I felt in some way very skeptical about these people who were convinced that they know all.
Oh, yes.
The doctors in Germany are called gods in white. I don't know if you call them in English also gods in white.
Well, we have a term, medical deity. MD stands for medical deity,
Yeah,
or masters in domination, but it's the same idea.
yeah. Well, I would say we can meet in calling them gods in gray.
Okay.
That something between black and white.
Well,
I
and
call them okay, gods in gray.
we've both explored the other side, from the over pharmacolorization and dependence on drugs and surgery and ignoring the human side. And that's what wellness is all about. And our careers have merged that way of we didn't accept the just take a pill and it'll go away, or well, if in doubt, cut it out, the surgical model.
I think that is too simple. If you look at the development of medicine from the first doctors, which were the shamans, during, well, it's difficult for me to say when our school medicine or our modern medicine started. Probably when we left the dark Middle Ages in the Renaissance, when Andreas Vesalius did the first real anatomical studies. From there, well, I think this, looking to my biography, was an important discovery when I was something like 14, 15, 16. I read Carl Jakob Burckhardt, which is the great work about the culture of the Renaissance.
Mm-hmm.
I think this was very influential for me, becoming aware of the importance of education, the ideal of the Renaissance, l'uomo universale. I don't know how to translate it in its real meaning into English. The universal man, I don't know if this really fits what l'uomo universale meant in the Renaissance, but a kind of universal education. And that was for me somehow the line I wanted to follow. And after finishing the gymnasium, I was asking myself, well, what is the right studies for me? Philosophy, psychology, sociology, law. I went through all these different choices and made something like a content analysis. What is that, what I'm going to study? And the final conclusion was medicine gives me the possibility to understand men in all its different dimensions. Mm-hmm. So my decision was the analysis of, I wanted to, well, to continue my basic questions. I want to understand life. I want to understand man.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the most universal way to understand man was to go through the studies of medicine. And there, well, I was fascinated by the preclinical studies for specifically physiology. And I thought, oh, that might be a possibility for me to become a researcher in physiology.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, then I even concentrated my interest in physiology of the central nervous system. This was accompanied by the discovery, that was earlier, that was when I was between 16 and 18. I also discovered cybernetics.
Oh.
Robert Wiener. And there began, I think, another important line, systemic thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And again, applying systemic thinking, I thought, oh, studying medicine is the right way.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's back up a minute with your earlier schooling. Did you stay in that village then as for high school, or
I stayed in that village until 1950. At that time, we had difficulties to somehow survive. My mother was an artist, and as a war widow with two young boys, the question was, how can we go to school? Lengries was not high school. There was only the basic school. And then the family said, oh, you have to move into a real city where is a high school, at least a high school. The only city where we could get access was the place, the native place of my mother. And that was Witten an der Ruhr. Witten an der Ruhr is an industrial city in the Ruhr, which is the industrial heart of Germany.
Mm-hmm.
The father of my mother has been an industrial founder, and but he died in 1914. So my mother was 2 years. That makes me aware, if I look through my family, all the children have had the fact that one of the parents died early.
Mm.
My father also, my mother, myself, my brother.
Yeah, pattern.
We did not have complete families.
Mm-hmm.
Nevertheless, I think we had, in some aspects, good childhoods, because there was always possibility to grow, to learn. And that was the reason why my mother decided she wanted to go back to Witten an der Ruhr, where she could work, find possibilities to create a somehow independent. And now we have. Do you have an echo?
No.
I have a strong echo.
It's probably not going to show up on the recording, so
okay.
Let's hope it goes away.
Okay. Technology is incomplete, like most things, and we have only the illusion that we live in perfect worlds. And this is an illusion which I never had. And I'm happy for this, because it, I think, gave me a good and realistic base.
Mm-hmm.
So this continued when we went to Witten an der Ruhr. There I did what you call the high school from 1950 to 1959. There I finished high school, and then I made the decision, well, I will study medicine. And well, the years from 1950, the years of high school, have been years, I think, quite happy. I had all the possibilities. We have had the end of the war and the new creation of Germany with mixed feelings, with that, I want to express my difficult inquiries to understand what had happened. And we had people who had survived the war, perhaps as heroes. And when they talked about the war, they became glooming eyes, thinking of their deeds as heroes. And I knew, well, this is only one part. So I felt somehow alone, not believing all the wonderful stories you were told.
Mm-hmm.
Something I remember in school, our teachers who had been in the war, if we did not want to work, we push buttons and asked them, tell us about what you have memories of the war. And then you got the hero stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, you don't tell me the story of my father, because he was a hero, but a dead hero. So there was a kind of what I would call today a very sane doubt, a wish to look behind, to understand the things which were not told. And in that way, well, I think I became what Helmut Schelsky, the sociologist, defined as the skeptical generation.
Mm-hmm.
If I look to young people now, they have a kind of naive optimism in the best case. Or they feel lost. I didn't feel lost. During all my childhood or my time as between 10 and 19, I felt optimistic, full of trust in my own power, the power of a survivor.
Mm-hmm.
And there was always that kind of felt obligation that I am responsible for what happens. So I make a jump. I got very fascinated by a politician like John F. Kennedy. Don't ask what the state can do for you. Ask what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
This was something which really touched my heart. And I think I continue to keep connected with that feeling because it somehow protected me to just not forget that I am a survivor. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there are so many good things to talk about. So I'm somehow.
Well, let's go back to your medical training. Where did you go to school for medicine?
I choose the University of Saarbrück for the reason that at that time when I started in '59, Saarbrücken, the Saarland, was still half French. And we still had to pay in French francs. And during the first year, the Saarland was reconnected with Germany. But the interesting thing was we had French professors and German professors, and I was able to really get somehow what my feeling was, what I wanted that should develop a kind of Europe.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the decision to go to Saarbrück was this beginning feeling that the nations are not the future. We had to be somehow international. And then there was another very interesting detail. The physiologists were disciples of Hodgkin and Huxley. So what we could learn about physiology of the central nervous system, which became my favorite, was very well presented.
Mm.
And I was, yeah, I really liked to study. And so I became a very brilliant student, which finished the first part of the medical studies. We call that preclinical studies. I don't know if you have the same system in the United States.
Yes, we have the first 2 years generally are academic, but we do a 3 or 4 year college, usually a college degree before that. So, but in Australia, it's a 6-year program beginning out of high school. So I'm familiar with both systems. But yeah, you were 19 when you entered med school.
The preclinical takes 5 semesters, which is 2.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then you move into the clinical, which are 3 years, if you are straight.
Was it 3 years, did you say?
3 years clinical studies.
3 years clinical.
With the examinations, you have 6 years.
Mm-hmm. That's similar to the Australian system.
What I was not aware of, became aware only later, was that my fascination in systemic thinking and, well, in the field of what is the driving system, the brain, became somehow my entrance into the professional life, which was totally untypical. In Saarbrück, I did the best examination, and as this was still under French influence, the French are very elite-minded. So you get a prize for the best examination. This prize was sponsored by Ron Poulenc. And in that time, Ron Poulenc was one of the leading pharmaceutical firms for the beginning of pharmaceuticals.
Mm-hmm.
And during my clinical studies, I was interested specifically after studying pharmacology, to get closer into this field. So I did a kind of today it will be called training program for students.
Mm-hmm.
I had asked Ron Poulenc if I could come as a student to understand the industry. And they invited me for a trainee program where I wanted to apply my physiological thinking, translating it into what is the physiology of a big corporation.
Mm.
And there I somehow was discovered by a mentor who told me, well, you're going to finish your studies, and if you have finished your studies, we want to talk with you about your further professional development. Well, during my clinical studies, as I was a brilliant student, I used my time to somehow look into all the fields which were not covered by the medical school. German universities are less separated. You have more access to the other faculties. So I went into psychology, I went into sociology, and I looked around wherever I could. And this was possible as long as you somehow did your medical studies well enough.
The Renaissance man is unfolding.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So I tried to really follow this idea of understanding the world as a complex system. And I got aware that the thing which most attracted me was the issue of complexity.
Mm.
And I never left this perspective. I was always attracted by the complexity. And if I look to what we today call the VUCA world, are you familiar with this term VUCA world?
No.
That's an acronym for the modern world, which means volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and I'm blocking.
I have to look that one up. I've never heard that.
Ambiguity, or ambivalence. Ambiguity.
Mm-hmm.
This is somehow the definition of what happens to people who live consciously in our today's world. They are And I'm faced with people who have problems with the VUCA world in the last 20 years after somehow I left my normal professional life and went into some kind of very agile retirement. I'm not retired, really.
Hardly.
I am working with people who need somebody who is experienced enough to support them in their wish to understand how a complex world works. And you have to be habited with uncertainty and complexity, and you have to be somehow familiar with dealing with uncertain complexities. And if you look to the role of a sensitive physician who does not get lost in the pride of we know all and the best technologies, and who is not aware that each technology creates as many problems as it solves.
Or more.
Yeah. So you see, I'm still on the track, the same track.
And your childhood prepared you for the tools and the resilience. So, well, now let's go back to your chronology here. You had the 3 clinical years, and any more to say about that?
What happened was unplanned. During my clinical studies, I somehow became skeptical about the clinical teachers who have been full of pride about their medical knowledge. And I said, well, didn't they hear from Socrates, we know that we don't know?
Mm-hmm.
I was very much confronted with these medical deity, how you call it, MD, or what
medical deities.
I named the gods in white.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, I'm too habited to look behind and to see, well, what I said, each technological innovation solves problem and creates problem. And this being familiar with uncertainty, not being anxious of uncertainty, but being, familiar with uncertainty.
Important trait.
Yeah, made that I very often continued what I had done already in the preclinical studies. I want to know, so I was brilliant, but also for many an annoying student who always had questions. And I got the full possibilities of responses. Some were very supportive, and others said, oh, this young man, he's just annoying. And I was somehow skeptical how I would fit into the normal clinical world as a intern. And then happened something which I couldn't plan. Oh, during my clinical studies, I did interesting things like for nearly half a year, I hitchhiked around Asia because I wanted to know what is Zen Buddhism in real. And I thought to get an answer, I have to go to Japan, but I didn't have money, so I hitchhiked. Very, very adventurous.
Oh, wow. All the way to Japan?
All the way to Japan, through Iran, Afghanistan. I had the chance to see a non-destroyed Afghanistan. Through India, Burma, Thailand, Hong Kong. Finally, I finished in Japan. Again, perhaps that's typical. I had the idea, I want to know what is Zen Buddhism. I had done a kind of practice at the University of Tübingen as a student, and I was confronted with the psychiatry which started with psychopharmacology. And in some way, it was for me difficult to digest how people were treated with pills, technologically interesting, but without real human touch. I really observed the two sides of the medical profession. The technicians, fond of what we are able to do in the beginning of that new era. And on the other side, I saw that the relationship they had to their patients was not very human, was very technical. So I often saved myself and went into the library where I found interesting articles about, from a German psychologist working in Japan, about a Buddhist-based psychotherapy, the Morita therapy. And I remembered, oh, this is impressive. And when I was arriving in Japan, I went to the German embassy to get my letters. And well, at that time, there was no communication like today that you just open your iPhone and then you have all your information. You had the letters, which took 2 or 3 weeks to be transported. And I found letters from my family. And I then walked to the diplomat who was responsible for the cultural relationships. And I asked him, are you able to make me a connection to the clinic where the Morita therapy is practiced? And he asked me, oh, how are you coming to Japan? I told him, oh, well, I did a very adventurous travel as a hitchhiker. And then he said, oh, wait, don't tell me this. Can we invite you? I have a psychologist friend. Can we invite you for dinner? And then you tell us. So we met in a nice Japanese restaurant. And during that dinner, I told them some of the adventures which I had on that really interesting trip. where things happen which you don't, you cannot plan. I met as a hitchhiker a German who had been a prisoner in Eastern Germany in a prison where the Stasi, I don't know if I can translate this. The Stasi is the secret police, the state
I've heard of them, yeah.
of the DDR, the East German state. And he was able to get out of this state short time in the Federal Republic, and then went to the United States and became an engineer for Hewlett and Packard. But his dream was always to do a world tour. And we met in a desert when he had a problem with his car, and until Afghanistan, where we met again, we met several times, most often with problems to repair his car or the cars which had taken me up as a hitchhiker. And in Afghanistan, he decided, oh, can I join you on your hitchhiking trip? We did that. He sold his car, and we tramped to India, where he got, I think in Peshawar in Pakistan, got very sick. And so he said, oh, you saved my life. We went to Kashmir, which ended in us hunting bears. And well, things like adventures like this were the stories which I could tell the diplomats in Tokyo. And then an interesting thing happened. The psychologist, a professor at a private university, said, oh, you wanted to get into contact with a clinic who does the Morita therapy. I know them very well. I will write you a recommendation letter in Kyoto. So I went to Kyoto and was really, I found what I had searched for, understanding things as they are really. And my goal, my inner goal was, I want to get in connection with Zen Buddhism. What happened in the clinic was that they told me, oh, you must get into contact with Hirata Roshi, one of the leading Zen masters. And he got me in the clinic and said, you must come to my temple and I will teach you Zen meditation.
Now, all of this, were they speaking German, or how did you, with the language barrier, how did you manage?
There was a very special thing. He had been invited by Germany to help a German professor who wanted to translate Bi Yen Lu. This is one of the very important books of the Zen Buddhist literature. And he was invited, I think, by the German universities to support Ernst Benz. I think at that time he was a professor at the University of Marburg, to manage the translation. And he stayed there for about 2 years, so he spoke perfectly German. And wow. I had the unique opportunity to connect with him in German. But the important teachings were the Asians don't talk that much. If they teach you, they show you. So I think I got a very, very basic Zen education and a mantra, which I kept until today. And the mantra is, each day is a good day. If you start each day with such a mantra,
can't go wrong.
You do not forget the difficulties from which you started, but you somehow feel, yes, and what can I do that this day becomes a good day? And for working in the medical field, I think that is the best mantra.
Yeah.
Or the most helpful mantra.
Good one. So how long were you in Japan?
Something like 5 or 6 weeks. Enough to get somehow the feeling that I have at least one half which feels more at home in the Eastern world than in the Western world. Which means that Western rationalism or intellectualism is only one part. I later understood this when I studied Wittgenstein. Linguistics, again, trying to understand complexity and that language is only a part of the reality. It's a reductionist system which is needed to organize communication, but language is only a part. And that sensitivity to the constructions which we develop to make our life maniable. Oh, I sometimes get mixed with French because I was living for quite a long time also in a French world, and I feel that I'm at home in very different languages, and dependent from the subject. And in this case, I got maniable, which means how to manage it.
Well, now from Japan, did you hitchhike back to Germany, or how did you?
I served as a guinea pig to the Russians. In 63, that was in 63. I had started, when I started from Germany with my hitchhiking, with the idea how to go back. I would like to use the Trans-Siberian. In 59, I was one of the first West German students in Moscow. I had organized for a group of students and young scientists of the University of Saarbrück a study journey to Moscow and Leningrad. And there I met a German hitchhiker when we were coming back from Moscow. This was in 59. It was somehow a semi-official travel, semi-official because the parliament of the Saarland supported this travel as an official travel of students to discover Russia. And we met with interesting people of the Gosplan, very, very interesting travel. But on that travel, I met a German hitchhiker which came from Afghanistan and who told me about his adventures. And he had done part with the Trans-Siberian. And I had the idea, oh, later on, I will try to do this. And I had this in mind when I started my travel to Japan. And well, then I asked the German, the Russian embassy in Germany. And I continued each country where I went. I asked, can I get a visa to return with the Trans-Siberian? And each time they told me, well, it may be possible, but we cannot tell you now. You must ask later on. And I think finally in Hong Kong, I met somebody who said, oh, if you go to the Russian embassy in Tokyo, you will probably be provided with a visa for the Trans-Siberian. The reason was in Tokyo in '64 were the Olympic Games.
Oh.
The Russians were thinking ahead and they said, oh, we will open the Trans-Siberian for tourists and we will use some guinea pigs.
Huh.
So I did my retour from Japan to Germany with the Trans-Siberian.
How long did that take?
Huh?
How long did that take?
10 days. Something
wow, all on a train.
10 days.
Wow.
At that time, there were no tourists. So it was really interesting.
Was it crowded? A lot of people?
Well, Russian tourism did not exist in '63. I think it started in '64 when the Russians opened the Trans-Siberian for tourists to go to the Olympic Games in Tokyo. Well, we are far, far away from that is an adventurous life and not the biography of a doctor.
Well, it certainly shaped your adventures. So you've traveled back across the Siberian wastelands and Russia and back. You got back to Germany, and
I got
still
back
in
to
your clinical
Germany with the idea, oh, now I have 2 semesters left. I wanted to do that in Berlin, the Berlin University.
Excuse me.
Because my fascination in the field of psychopharmacology continued. And I remember that I participated in a small group, 2 professors and 3 students, introduction into psychopharmacology. One of these professors was Hans Hippius, who became one of the most professional and experienced psychiatrists in the field of psychopharmacology. He became the chair in psychiatry, I think, in the early '70s. And this connection somehow had influence in a decision which again was not planned. Before I started into the examinations, by chance I met my mentor when I was as a student with Ron Poulenc. And we met and were astonished. And then he asked me what happened, and we had connected always through the normal Christmas card, saying what happened in the year. And well, I somehow remembered that I would connect with them after my studies. What happened then was that he told me, oh, we have bought a pharmaceutical firm in Germany, and we have problems with the scientific department. The chief for that department will be there 1 year later. What do you think? Can you manage that department? I said, well, I'm not yet finished with the medical studies. He said, oh, you are intelligent, you can manage. And in that, you can think about that, tell me in 1 week. So I went to ask Hans Hippius, Professor Hippius, what he thinks about that. And he told me, well, Ron Poulenc offered you that. That's something you should do. Don't think what the others say, go there. So I started to replace that future man who should come in 1 year. And I said, oh, I can get a lot of experience, why not? And I will do my examinations later. And things developed in a sense that when I wanted to start my examinations, and the original chief of the department had arrived, Ron Poulenc told him, well, can you arrange yourself with the fact that you will have a very young director? And he somehow just had to accept. They have told me, well, you go to do your examinations, but we want you to be still, to keep on as the head of that department. Mm. Somehow they thought the way you manage things, that's just what we want. And we don't pay you for your the time, we pay you for the results. So don't care, you can do your examinations, and we just want you to be present in the company. Mm-hmm. Which finished that 1 year later, I was part of the management of the company, and I told them, well, after the examinations, I have to do my internships. Oh yes, you can do them. But you keep on going to be part of the management. Well, and that led to something like 7 years being in the management of the German Ron Poulenc pharmaceutical companies, which grew. And 2 or 3 years later, I became the first managing director. Quite unusual for a young man.
In your early 20s.
Yeah, no, late 20s. That were late 20s. What I find is something which I was trained with, survival as a 5-year-old in the wartime. The mindset was not very different.
Mm-hmm. So now your internship, how many years and what did you do there?
The normal internship in Germany at that time was 2 years. And I had an arrangement with the hospitals where I did the internship that when I needed free time, I got it, so it took me 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but it allowed me to see the complexity and to become aware of one problem, which I think most of the physicians aren't aware of. What I learned is how to buy research and to organize research. And as an intern, I was learning to become a doctor in a hospital. And as a manager, I learned how to teach these people how to use drugs. You see the complexity.
How to use what?
To use drugs.
Drugs. Oh, okay, yeah. And now is the internship a lot of different rotations like OB and surgery?
Yes,
and
yes. You have, I think, 10 months of internal medicine and then OB and surgery. And you have some time like 10 months where you are free to choose. And these 10 months, I did research in pharmacology.
Uh-huh.
So I could work my clinical or the trials in pharmacology I could do during the nights. And I could do, other time I could do my work as a manager.
Uh-huh. So
So
then after that period, did you go into practice?
after that, I had my impression that I was somehow living in a golden cage.
Uh-huh.
And I talked with my mentor and said, well, I learned management in doing. I would like to understand again. And could you understand that I want to do a good managerial theoretical education? And he said, yes, I can. So after 7 years of management, I got the possibility to go to INSEAD in Fontainebleau. INSEAD is still one of the world best business schools. And I did I was 31, an MBA at INSEAD. INSEAD was very close connected with Harvard and Stanford. And as INSEAD at that time and still today, I think the ratings from the Financial Times in the last year put INSEAD in the #1 position worldwide. INSEAD has the tradition of the grandes écoles, of the elite universities or les grandes écoles. It's a very special structure besides the university where the French train their elite. And that was exactly the place where I felt, oh, that's the best thing for me. This was one of my best years in freedom. I could study with brilliant people. And then, well, during my medical studies, I was very impressed by a cardiologist at the University of Innsbruck, Max Hallhuber, who became in the late 60s the chief of one of the most advanced rehabilitation clinics in Germany, the Klinik Höhenried in Bernried. And I always had followed what he was doing. And during 2 weeks where we waited after the examinations at INSEAD, and INSEAD had a very interesting way to honor the diplomas. We got our diplomas from Edward Heath in London. And during the 2 weeks, which were in midst of end of the examinations, I visited Max Hallhuber in Bernried, and he told me, well, you have had a really interesting life. Aren't you interested to work with me in cardiology? And I said, well, that ruins my industrial career. But on the other hand, as I did not believe really in career tracks, I was tempted again by curiosity. And the way how he had impressed me with his medical thinking, well, I said, well, if I want to keep on my industrial career, doors will open at the right moment. So I went and worked for 2 years with Max Hallhuber in that very future-oriented environment to change cardiological rehabilitation. At that time, somebody who had myocardial infarction was put into a bed for at least 6 weeks.
Oh yes, I remember those days.
You remember those days?
Yeah.
Max Hallhuber said, no, we have to get them out of the bed as early as possible. And at that time, this hospital, this clinic, rehabilitation clinic, was called by the public the murder clinic. Because the people had to leave the bed and go into sports training. And the early mobilization started probably in the most consequent way with Max Hallhuber in Höhenried. That played an important role in my later medical work when I became chief of the Munich Health Park. And the Munich Health Park became the center where you had most of the ambulatory continuation of the rehabilitation work after the rehabilitation clinic.
Well, now that's where I knew of you at the Munich Health Park, but we've got a probably 20-30 years here in between to get you there. So what was the next stage?
After my work with Hallhuber, I had again a very interesting industrial project. One of the big chemical firms wanted to divest into a more closer to the German Procter and Gamble was Henkel. And Henkel had the best toxicology. So strategically, it was an interesting idea. Should we move from detergents closer to drugs or something similar, make a kind of new industrial branch? And they asked me to prepare that project. And I could start to do that preparatory work during the time I was as a physician in the clinic Höhenried. But the question if Max Hallhuber had somehow prevented me to continue my managerial career, somehow was answered by itself by the offer of Henkel to develop that project. So in 1974, I re-entered industrial management and worked for 2 more years to develop that project, which Henkel did not really realize, because the money which were needed for that project, they made a strategic decision to buy Clorox in the United States, which meant that they stayed with their origins. And well, very, very fast, I was transferred through headhunters to Solvay, which wanted to become a more pharmaceutical, or wanted to develop a stronger pharmaceutical branch. And the CEO of the German part of Solvay, who was the corporation where the pharmaceutical interests were condensed, was the Kali Chemie in Hanover, which I joined as a deputy managing director for the pharmaceutical branch. What I understood with all the strategic knowledge was that the future of the pharmaceutical industry, I saw somehow very skeptical. My idea for the pharmaceutical division of Solvay was that they should concentrate on immunology. At that time, this was for them too much in the future, and they wanted to do what I called old-fashioned drugs with high return on investments. What I told them, that I didn't believe in that somehow not going for the future, that they would not be successful with their strategy. And I was thinking, that is not what I really wanted from my medical profession. My interest was health. Is there a possibility? I think the problem which I had at the end of my medical studies was that I knew all about diseases and nothing about health, or nearly nothing. And my idea was medicine should go for health. And this is something different than just the technology of curing disease. There
and
is
not even curing as much as masking symptoms and pushing it under. Yeah, that was my problem with my internship of prescribing drugs. It felt wrong to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they work in a limited way, and that limited way is not sufficient for the economical understanding what industry is for, making money.
Yeah.
And I think doctors have some kind of different mindset. So I said, well, life is not just making as much money as you can, even if that is the perspective of an industry which says we develop technology and this technology cures. If the pharmaceutical industry would function like this, I would have probably remained, because it's interesting and we cannot, the modern technology is needed. But if the technology is submitted to making as much money as possible, you come into zones where I think there are few managers who really ask the kind of questions I was used to ask throughout all my life.
Hmm.
So you may understand the kind of conflict zone in which I was living.
Cognitive dissonance.
Yes, cognitive dissonances, which were caused by admiring the knowledge and admiring also the goodwill in a lot of research and the good things which have been invented in a risky business, that is the pharmaceutical industry. I saw this, and in some aspects, I really was fascinated by all that scientific and I can also say serious work. But I used the image, what I really felt real was not black or white, but gray. Seeing the limits, being aware of the limits. And within the pharmaceutical industry, this management, use our drugs and you will heal, was not for me clear enough as a perspective. I thought my perspectives have been more complex. So I had made in my mid-30s the decision I can do my work in the industry, but I have to have a kind of correction factors. And I started with psychoanalysis. And I had the chance of having very, very good psychoanalytic teachers. So I think it was during my work in that cardiological rehab clinic that I became aware that my real field was psychosomatic medicine. Mm-hmm. And going into psychoanalysis and learning psychoanalysis was for me a way to discover a more complex field of what I call the real medicine. Mm-hmm. So when I was 37, I thought, no, you have to make a decision. Is that to continue the pharmaceutical career, pharmaceutical industry? As a manager, I was in the highest level, and I thought I can change perspectives, but I learned from the investors that not medical reasons, but return on investment is important. And the manager has to follow the directions from the investors.
Yeah, you're locked into that one.
Business is business and not medicine.
Yeah. Well, now the health park started in the early 70s, didn't it?
The health park started in the early 70s, and Professor Hallhuber, Max Hallhuber, had been in the scientific board of the Munich Health Park. And when I heard, after a process where I have been meditating, where is my future? What is my way? I heard that the Munich Health Park is looking for a chief physician. And I thought, well, that should be the best, that should be the right way for me.
You've got the managerial skills and the clinical skills, yeah.
Yeah, I made a short call to Max Hallhuber, and he said, oh, you are ready to come? Well, then you are the right man, come. So I left in 78, early 78. I left the pharmaceutical industry. Yes, I was just 38. And I started as a chief physician of the Munich Health Park with this strange mixture of managerial and clinical skills. And well, the next 25 years, I remained with the Munich Health Park, and I found a place where I really could do creative work in developing medicine towards something, I think, where we met, and because the world of wellness is small worldwide.
You came over to Wisconsin.
We did really very innovative things in developing the ambulatory rehabilitative approach, and the Munich Health Park was the ideal place to continue the clinical approach into normal life for rehabilitation of all kinds of cardiac diseases. But doing something which was innovative. The physician in a role as an educator, because the myocardial infarction is a lifestyle disease.
Mm-hmm.
So to work on healing meant that the patients learn to lead another life. So it was clear that I met with Dean Ornish. And in the early 90s, I published Dean's book in Germany.
Mm.
And well, the Munich Health Park really had become, even before I heard from Dean Ornish, a place of very innovative medicine.
Mm-hmm. What kind of staff did you have? How many people were you supervising?
Well, 50 psychologists, 25
Wow.
physicians, and again, something like 50 Feldenkrais teachers, physiotherapists, nutritionists. The basic idea of the Munich Health Park was to find practical solutions. What could be a medicine for the 21st century, where we have to deal with chronic diseases,
Mm-hmm.
mostly caused by lifestyle? And the answer was not better drugs, but the answer was teach people how to develop healthy lifestyles,
Mm-hmm.
which means use drugs, but in a wise way, and use your own forces. It remembers me, I've cited Kennedy, don't ask what the state can do for you. I have transformed this and have taught the people, the visitors to the health park, don't only ask what the doctor and the medical system can do for you, ask what can you do for yourself.
Yeah.
That was the philosophy of the Munich Health Park.
Mm.
And what I was attracted really was that for the first time, I really was free to create interdisciplinary teams. What I observed during my visits in the United States, for example, I was interested to see how function the groups which Dean Ornish created. And I think it was in a visit in Des Moines, I looked at a group who worked in the style like Dean Ornish, but the cardiologist stand outside the group in his white cloth, and he did not become a member of the group working with the people. And I thought, well, the physicians and the psychologists and the physiotherapists, they have to form a team. And then they have to include the patient also, not as an object, but as a subject.
Yeah. Now, when you were in the States, you also came to the National Wellness Conferences in Stevens Point. I
Yes.
think we met each other then.
This was a discovery also not planned at all. In '85, I got a WHO fellowship to visit the United States with all the prominent people working in that specific field of, well, innovative medicine, preventive medicine. And I had the possibility to go to the Menninger Clinic, no, but I'm blocking on the name, the Mayo Clinic.
Yeah, Mayo. Mm-hmm.
It was for me very interesting to meet the most advanced people, and I was impressed by what I saw at the Mayo Clinic. Then they asked me, what are you doing, especially in your field? And I explained them how we manage cardiac rehabilitation. The physician, I think he was the head of the rehabilitation, said, oh, that's really innovative. Can you teach us, or can you explain us how you do? And the next day he organized the conference, and I told them how we manage rehabilitation at the Munich Health Park. And
wow.
By meeting the people at the Mayo Clinic, I got aware that we have really done very innovative things. And that happened again and again and again. And I think it was in Chicago where somebody told me, oh, have you heard of the American wellness movement and of Stevens Point? I said, no, what is that wellness? This was in '85. And they told me, oh, here's the phone number of Bill Hattler. Mm-hmm. Give him a call. So I gave Bill a call, and he invited me immediately to visit him in Stevens Point. So I got connected with the American wellness movement. And I thought, oh, with some differences, but they are going in the same direction. And I got aware that many of the things we did in the Munich Health Park, we followed some American ideas based on the work of Aaron Antonovsky. Mm-hmm. His work on salutogenesis.
Yeah.
And I had made salutogenesis as one of the chief principles for the Munich Health Park. There was what I always had been looking for, that part which somehow was not part of the medical system. And my idea was the medical system of the future should be like what you really have described in your continuum scheme, from disease to health, to high-level wellness. Mm-hmm. This was the world, I think, which should be covered by institution, and they should not be separated, but the continuum should go from premature death problems to high-level wellness. Yeah. So this idea really was the core idea which I could realize in the Munich Health Park, in connecting the health park with the most advanced medical institutions. And I think we did really very, very pioneer work. For example, at that time, more and more people got cardiovascular surgery. And what happens after surgery? There were no concepts. There was a hospital, but then the medical system was not prepared. to prepare the continuum back to health.
Yeah.
And there I found the idea I always have had in, well, my intellectual concept of what is holistic. Systems theory does not cut the world in parts, but it is a holistic view of man. Jack, there is something which is astonishing. You disappeared completely from my screen. I don't know if the